Okay, welcome to Showdown. I'm Mark Kaysen, and it is February the 29th, which doesn't come every year, as you know, Eric Greitens.
I do know, hey, it's a special time, Leap Day, here with Mark Kaysen. What better way to celebrate it, man? Happy to be on with you.
Absolutely. And by the way, let me say Governor Eric Greitens, because you were. And, you know, it's funny having this chance to actually talk to you on the air because of this stupid history that we've got, which goes back to you being a teenager.
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, do you remember the show that you were on?
I do remember it, Mark, because actually, and now that I think of it, I believe, Mark, that was the first radio interview I'd ever done in my life.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised. You were probably 16 years old.
Well, I was 16 years old. And if you remember, it was a program called Youth Leadership St. Louis.
Right.
A wonderful guy named Bruce Carlon. And I love that program because it exposed young people to all of these different issues that were happening around the city and around the state. And specifically what we'd done, I remember, was we had gone, and Bruce was really, he was an adventurous, thoughtful guy who really trusted young people. And what had happened, Mark, was we had spent the night in a homeless shelter. And he had done that to make sure that young people got a real sense for what was actually happening. And it was a lesson that really stayed with me about how important it was. If you really want to solve a problem, if you really care about people, if you really love them, you got to make sure that you get your hands on a problem so you can really understand it. And Bruce had brought us to do that. And then I believe that you were very generous to bring Bruce and I onto the show to talk about the experience that we had.
Yes, and the thing about it is that was the very early days of my talk radio operation, with Jim Berger, of course, right. And Jim Berger was on here last night, and he was dressed up with a pair of aviator sunglasses and a little white cap on, and underneath him it said Joe. So, it was fun, and typical Jim Berger, who, likes to play with people.
Have a good
time. Yeah. And we did. And we had a great time with you. And I'll never forget, Jim and I talked about it for years afterward, that you had announced on that show that you wanted to be president. and you pretty much had a good plan that you explained as well. And so, we had been very impressed with you at the time.
Thanks,
and as you moved along, and by the way, Stephanie Harmon has just joined us. Hi, Steph.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Eric.
Hey, Steph, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And yourself?
Beautiful, ma'am. Beautiful.
That's good. That's good.
Yes, anyway, we had talked about, your plan for becoming president and how very serious you seemed about it at that time. And then, we sort of watched you as you grew up, and as we sort of grew up too. Unfortunately, I'm still growing and getting up to levels that are, sort of off the map, but you're still, pretty reasonable. As far as the number, I have a lot of energy, but I have a crazy number. But at any rate, one of the things that was apparent as you moved on and went to Oxford and did all the great things that you did was that you were an amazingly caring person. I mean, you cared about people.
Yeah.
I mean, other people get on the air or go to interviews and say, "Oh, I care," but you weren't necessarily telling anybody. You were just showing it.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
Well, Mark, I so appreciate the compliment. And I think it's one of the things that's so important is that you have to keep an open heart, right? And it's one of the things that's so sad about our current politics. I mean, people who have an open heart, people who are caring. And one of the things that I found my whole life, and I also found when I was in office, was that if you were working with open-hearted people who really cared about an issue, and they might come from a different background, a different perspective, they might have different ideas, they've had different experiences, that's beautiful because you could learn from each other. And you could always find ways to work together, because what mattered at the end of the day was, were you able to improve lives? Were you able to save lives? Were you able to change things for the better, to make people healthier? And unfortunately, like, politics has become so dominated. It was in the state of Missouri, and you see it also at the national level, true in both parties, with kind of corruption and lobbyists and these agendas that are completely disconnected from what actually matters for people. And I think it's a real test for any man or woman to live your life and to keep an open heart, to really keep an open heart. And if you do that, then it allows you to find ways to be of service. And yes, I've always tried to do that. I was blessed when I was young to have mentors like Bruce Carl. I mean, think about that, Mark. Like, he was such an amazing guy. He took a group of 16-year-old students down and had us actually stay in a homeless shelter, right? A lot of times, if people tried that today, be like, oh, well, we're worried that somebody might get sued or something
Right.
might happen.
Mhm.
If you really care about people, you got to be willing to go and see them. You got to be willing to meet them right where they're at. And a lot of times when you do that, you have the most amazing learning, the most amazing insights. And I try to still do that every day.
And I have to say that I talk to lots of people all the time, naturally, doing these broadcasts. But sure, I've got people who say bad things about you. I mean, you know that. I mean,
Right.
if you're in politics, someone's going to say some bad things,
Of course.
and that's fine. They don't know really.
Yes.
They don't know you. They just
Yes.
they see an image and they get some idea of what they think is
Right.
going on. I understand that too. However, here's one that I don't think I ever told you, but this was a lady. If you remember the Jewish cemetery that was messed up
Yes, sir.
in University City, and this lady came to the cemetery to fix things up, as many of us did.
Yeah.
And we had some of the students that I was working with at the yeshiva from Chesterfield that came out there as well.
Yes.
A number of those students all met you, and they met you in Jeff City and so forth. But anyway, this lady came up to me and we started talking about you. I don't remember how that happened, but at any rate, she said this was her big cut on you.
Yeah.
All you want to be is the Jewish JFK. And I said to her, that sounds pretty good to me. Well, why not? Why would that be bad? What would be wrong with that?
Right.
So, I never told you that story, did I?
No, that's the first time I heard it. That was a beautiful moment at the cemetery, and it was really spoke to the power of what people can do when they come together. Your listeners might remember when I was governor, we had this terrible act of vandalism in a historic Jewish cemetery. And what happened was, I just put out a message on Facebook and I said, you know what? We're going to show that we're stronger than any vandals. We're going to show that we can come together as a community. We're going to show together that the people of Missouri can come together. And I said, and I'm going to be in the cemetery tomorrow to help to clean it up. And you know what, Mark? We talked to folks from the Archdiocese. We talked to folks from evangelical churches. We talked to folks from Hindu organizations, Buddhist organizations. We just called all of them and said, hey, we're going to go out there and we're going to do this together. And you'll remember that day. It was amazing. Hundreds of people, young students, the elderly, they all came out to do something positive. And you know what, Mark? They might not have voted for me. They might not have agreed with me on every issue, but you know what? People were able to come together to do something positive together. And that's part of the hope that we have to keep, even in these incredibly divisive, difficult times. Like, people, at the end of the day, 95% 98% of people are good people. And if you ask them to find a way to come together and to help others, they will step forward. That was a beautiful day at the cemetery and a real testament to the people of Missouri.
Yeah. The other thing that I get, and I get a lot of this one, a lot of progressives,
Yeah,
who are generally a little more conservative than I am, as you know how
right.
far to the left I am.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they say to me, I've known Eric Greitens. I knew him here. I knew him there. What happened to Eric Greitens? Look what he's turned into. So let me ask you, I'm sure you heard that. And some of these people claim to have been friends of yours. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but they knew about you. How do you feel about that from people who watched you grow up as pretty liberal, and then you ended up a Republican governor?
Yeah, well, look, I think that what was always true was that all of my beliefs were based on what actually worked for people. And I'll tell you a quick story about this. As you know, Mark, I did lots of humanitarian work. This was all before I was in the military. I worked in Bosnia with refugee kids whose parents had been killed during the ethnic cleansing. I worked in Rwanda shortly after the genocide. I worked in Cambodia with kids who'd lost limbs to landmines. And one of the things that I learned in all of those situations was that it wasn't enough just to say that you cared. It wasn't even enough just to do things for people. You really had to understand whether or not what you were doing was working. What I saw in Rwanda was that a lot of the aid agency work that where they spent money to help orphan children actually led to families in Rwanda being split up, because what they did was they would only help kids who were orphans. And it was this incredibly difficult situation where these families were taking care of their kids. They might have been taking care of their sister's kids, a neighbor's kids. And then they're in this situation, and the only place where kids could get food, clothing, shelter, education, recreation was in a home for orphan kids. And a lot of the families ended up sending their kids to these centers. What we ended up finding was that the most effective thing to do was actually to help the families. They wanted to stay intact. They wanted to be able to support their kids. My point in saying that is only that my ideas developed based on what I saw was really working. It was the same thing I did with veterans. I asked myself, what's really going to work here? And I always found it when I did the humanitarian work, found it when I worked with veterans, and I also found it as governor, Mark, was that it really didn't matter what the label was that somebody was wearing. If they actually cared about helping people, you could find a way to work with them. And so, yeah, it's sad sometimes because you'll have people who judge somebody because they didn't like your political commercial, or because they read something in a newspaper, which is, I think at this point, everybody's realized is like designed to be false, but they
Unbelievable.
read it and they take their opinion from that. Whereas I've always found people who say, you know what, I'm willing to think for myself. I'm willing to actually meet with this man or woman and come to my own opinion. Those are the people who I think, I really respect and appreciate their opinion.
Yeah. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with a Missouri Democrat.
Yeah.
So Democrat now.
Yeah.
And this person said to me, I had mentioned you were coming on the show, and the comment was, boy, I sure hope you find out what Eric's planning to do, because I really like Eric a lot.
Yeah.
And this was a Missouri Democrat, so you definitely touch people in different ways and unusual ways. And so I got one more Eric story, and then I'm going to let Stephanie ask you a question here.
Sure.
But this is one of my best Eric stories. And this one I know you'll remember very well because it's very recent. And that is, I asked you to meet with Kelvin Adams,
I remember,
the superintendent from St. Louis Public Schools. And you really didn't even know why, but
Right.
you said, fine. Yeah, let him come. And when he got there, I'll never forget what you said. The first thing in the meeting, I thought it was brilliant. I tell the story all the time. You said, whatever it is that you've done in your life, Kelvin, that you wanted to do to help young people as an educator, whatever it is that you may have wanted to do and you weren't able to do it, if you will tell me about it, I would like to see if I can help you to achieve maybe one of your main goals that you weren't able to do. Right. And the thing I loved about it was Eric. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't Republican. It wasn't Democrat. It was exactly what I expected you to do. I mean, I didn't know the exact thing, but I knew that you would say something that was meaningful and that really, it did touch Kelvin Adams. And by the time we ended that conversation, as you will remember, there was one other thing, and I'm not sure if I even told you this, but Bob Holden and Mel Carnahan used to come to see my students on a regular basis in the inner city. Mm-hmm. They met with them. We'd go in and we'd sit and talk about monetary policy and all these different things. And in that meeting, strictly ad lib on the go there, you didn't know, I didn't even know I was going to say this. I asked Kelvin if you and I, Eric and Mark, could go into the St. Louis public schools and develop a civics program. And Kelvin said, yeah, you can do it. Now, I tell everybody about that meeting that, what's the superintendent of public schools in the city of St. Louis going to say? Sorry, Governor, we're not doing it. No, so I understand, he said yes. But the point is, unfortunately, the only thing that blew it up was you got into all the problems that you got into. And I'm sure there were many other things that you had in mind that you wanted to do in your time as governor. But I can just say that it's a shame because the St. Louis public schools could have really used the kind of help that you and I could have given them. So talk to me about that meeting.
Yeah, thanks, man. Look, here's the thing, is that like, those are all of our kids. They're all of our kids. And those kids aren't waking up every day, going into the St. Louis public schools or any other schools wondering, are the Democrats going to take care of me? Are the Republicans going to take care of me? They need to have good, caring, loving, thoughtful people who are all invested in our future, who are willing to work with them. And I've often found, what I was saying to the superintendent was that, like, let's think big, right? Let's not get trapped in the way things have always been. And it was exactly because of questions like that, Mark, was actually the reason why I ended up being attacked, right? Is, we had ended a corrupt tax credit program, which had stolen $770 million from the people of Missouri in the previous decade. And you'll also remember, I was the first governor in a generation. We took that money and we fully funded education. It was the first time in a generation I had fully funded education. And obviously the St. Louis Post-Dispatch didn't write about that. The Kansas City Star didn't write about that. They don't write about the good things that we did, but we had fully funded education. Why? Because the special interests and the lobbyists, they had been stealing from those kids. They had been stealing from those kids for a generation. And so what we did was we ended all of that corruption and we put that money in, we gave it to the kids. And then what happened? Then they spent, we now know, $120,000, gave it in cash from a convicted felon, former journalist, gave it to people to lie about me. They used it to make up a false case. They used it because what we were doing was actually standing up for those very kids, Mark, who you came in to advocate for, who the superintendent wanted to help, who I think people around the state of Missouri and around the city of St. Louis all want to help. And because we were actually doing it, not just lip service, okay, politicians lie all the time and they talk about the future. We were actually doing it. We took money away from the corrupt lobbyists, the corrupt politicians, and the corrupt special interests, and we put that money into education. And that's one of the reasons why, like, the system comes after you. But I do want to let everybody know, look, everybody saw what happened to me. They saw how viciously and maliciously and my boxing coach used to say, like, they did you dirty. Okay. Like that's what they did. But on the other side of that, we have to remain hopeful. We have to remain optimistic. We have to stay hopeful about what we can do together, because I do believe there are still great things for us to do in St. Louis and Missouri and around the world.
Yeah, and I agree, of course. And I'm going to let Steph ask a question,
Yes,
and
sir.
I've got some more to talk to you about. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Hey, Eric.
Hey,
Okay,
Stephanie.
I have a question. My question is going to go a little bit more political, though.
Yes.
I would like to know your thoughts on our judges, our St. Louis judges, in retrospect to the things that were going on with our circuit attorney in the office,
Yeah.
and the releasing of a lot of those young gentlemen, in especially like the young man who ran a red light, and he had been released about 20 plus times.
Yes,
You know,
ma'am.
to me, that's not really on the prosecutor, that's on the judges to make
Yes,
that
ma'am.
determination.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have to say, Stephanie, look, I'll say, first of all, I was incredibly disappointed. I didn't say anything at the time, but I was incredibly disappointed in retrospect with the treatment that I had in the justice system. Okay. I experienced this firsthand, right? You grow up in a country where you believe that the justice system is supposed to render justice for everyone. And we all know that it's not going to be perfect, but there are certain rules that you expect to be followed. Like, you can't charge someone for a crime with no evidence. That's what they did to me. All right. We also saw with the former circuit attorney, with Kim Gardner, it wasn't just her policies and practices, but you had time after time with a lot of criminals, as you just pointed out, Stephanie, who'd been arrested how many times? 20 times?
Mm-hmm.
And then turned right back out onto the streets. And so you had this real, and it's really unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, because you had this big confluence of factors where you didn't have, and we needed to have, judges in the justice system at all levels who would actually make a stand to protect the people of St. Louis and to protect the people of Missouri. I don't think that they passed that test. And I think when you look at what's happened in the city of St. Louis, I still get calls at least once every 2 weeks from businesses that are interested in, moving to Missouri, or they want to hear about Missouri or something like that. And to this day, like, the number one issue with businesses coming to St. Louis is crime. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like, it's just the tremendous loss of life that we've experienced. As you and Mark know, just a couple of years ago, I personally responded to a shooting of two beautiful young men who were gunned down in the middle of the street. Right. And I met with the families afterwards. Like, these tragedies are happening far too often, and everybody has to stand up and do their work. And Stephanie, I think that you were right to point out that we need judges to also stand up for justice.
Yeah. When it comes to the gun issue, it's sort of funny, because you are, without a question, a person who is qualified and in all ways, in temperament, in your history, your military work. I mean, you have the qualifications for that you would want to see for a person to have a gun.
Right.
I mean, there's no question about it. Anybody that doesn't get that, you were a Navy SEAL. You're certainly a disciplined.
I've put a few rounds downrange. Yeah,
I would say that. Yes. Okay. Now, we do have a country where a whole lot of people think they're as good as you, and they're not.
Correct.
And they want a gun.
Correct.
And some of them won't do anything to hurt anybody. Certainly Jamie loves his guns and would never hurt anybody.
Right.
All Jamie wants to do is heat his swimming pool. Trust me. Okay. So, but there are people out here who are certainly dangerous. And my guess is, even though you're currently on the side that, supports all these gun rights, but my guess is that you just don't want everybody just wholesale to run around with a gun, right?
Well, what I want is people to exercise responsibility, right? And that's true. That is true at every level. And one of the things that I've been fortunate, Mark, not only to be a Navy SEAL, practice the martial art of Hojutsu still to this day, which is the martial art of the firearm. I have tremendous respect for firearms. Always keep them safe. I think it's really important not just people to buy one or to own one, but if you want to have one, and this is true, like, trained a lot of women who live on their own and feel like they want to have this to be able to protect themselves. It's so important to train. It's really, really important to train. Just having a firearm is not the answer for self-protection unless you also train. You have to know how to use it, and you have to treat it with a tremendous amount of responsibility. And if you do that, then it can be obviously an incredible advantage in terms of self-defense. There's stories literally every day of people who defend themselves and their homes and their families with firearms. But that does take training. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Anybody who has followed in recent years, what you did, running for office and then getting in trouble. A lot of the people focus on the getting in trouble part. And I know, people that want to know things about you, they want to know about how you got in trouble. But honestly, it's pretty dumb, because anybody that doesn't understand that, isn't alive. So what I want to know is not that.
Yeah.
I don't want to know, okay? Because I know. What I want to know is, how did you feel about politics in general, which, you started off just trying to do good. I know you wanted to be president and all that, but you spent years doing all these, really cool things. Mother Teresa, everything. You were out there. And so, when you finally got into politics and it was so contentious and miserable, how did you feel?
Well, look, there are a lot of contentious and miserable people in politics, right? If you've met them, right? It's true in both parties, right? There's a lot of contentious and miserable people who are out there. But what I loved about the job, and I've always loved, is the good that you could do for people. And we did a lot of things, again, that like the news would never write about. Just like I said, they'll never write about the fact that we fully funded education. I also, in my very first year, said, look, we know that there are problems in the justice system. I want to send a message. I want people to investigate the cases of all of the prisoners in the state of Missouri. And if there are people who have been unjustly tried, like, I want to make sure that they're able to go home. We found the case of Judy Henderson. Judy Henderson was a woman who was sentenced to 50 years in prison for a murder that she did not commit. It was actually committed by her boyfriend, who actually shot Judy during the murder. And the previous three governors, the Board of Probation and Parole, had all recommended that her sentence be commuted. And it just hadn't been done. And if most governors, typically they don't do any pardons until the very end of their term, because it's politically risky, right? If you pardon someone who then goes out and hurts somebody else, then it can be a political headache. But I told my team, I said, look, the whole point of the pardon power is to be able to remedy injustice. And they brought me this story of Judy Henderson. And if you permit me, I'll tell you one 60-second funny story.
Sure.
This amazing woman. And my team went, they met with her. Everybody said, Judy Henderson is the most amazing woman you've ever met. She's kept her faith for all of these years. She's been in prison for 3 decades. And they said, absolutely, we should let her go. Now, I read, Mark, one of the things you'll remember when I was governor was I read I read policy documents. I read letters. I read to make sure that I knew all the facts of the cases that I was working on. And I read everything in Judy's file. And one of the things that came up in Judy's file was at the very end, they said that she had, I think they call them the correction system, like demerits or something like this. There were a couple of demerits on her record. And I said, well, if we're going to, let her out of prison, if we're going to commute her sentence, I want to know what these demerits are. So the team went back and they dug in and they came back to me and they said that the demerits were for contraband. And I thought to myself, like I really wanted to do this. I wanted to send Judy home before Christmas. I wanted to send this message to everybody in the system that we're gonna right injustices. We're gonna make things right. And I said, contraband. Like what was the contraband? And they told me that Judy got in trouble because the contraband was that she had too many books in her cell.
Oh my.
And the book that got taken out of her cell, the book that was contraband was Resilience by Eric Creighton. So when they told me that, I said, all right, absolutely, this is the right thing to do. And as you know, I personally went to the prison and I told Judy that she was going home that day. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. And
no, you mean because she read your book?
She also read the book, right? So
that's a good one.
But yeah, that's the point is that because this is true in all of life. In all of life, you always have a choice about what to focus on. Okay. So could I focus on all of the nasty politicians? Yes. Could I focus on the people who are corrupt and made up a false case against me? Yes. Could I focus on, the fact that the newspapers lied about me? Yes. Like you could choose to focus on all of that, or we can choose to focus on the great good that we did for Judy Henderson, the tremendous good that we did for veterans, right? You could focus on the tremendous good that we did standing up for police officers across the state of Missouri. There are a lot of good things that we were able to do. And I think that we all have a choice in life about what we're going to focus on. And I use even the negative stuff that comes. You have a choice to either, be bitter or get better. And I try to use all of that to get better.
And I'm going to focus really quickly on three different businesses that are supporting this show so that we can continue to stay here. And the first one I want to mention, of course, because it's, 4:30 and I'm starting to think about food at 5:00, and that's Wendy's. Wendy's is on Chesterfield Airport Road, 18000 Chesterfield Airport Road. And I can tell you that when I think about Wendy's, I think about baby back ribs. I think about onion rings. Steph knows I love onion rings. Say it again, Steph.
I said, and the onion rings.
Yeah, no, I got the onion rings in there. No, that's for sure. But also they've got pizza, so and more, lots more. It is a great restaurant. It's on Chesterfield Airport Road, 18,000 Chesterfield Airport Road. You've got to try Wendy's. Now, once again, I'm dressed in a suit. Now, Eric, I mean, you usually had that blue blazer on. That was a famous Eric Greitens blazer. But I always wear a suit, and usually, different suits and shirts and ties, because I go to the St. Louis Suit Company in Clayton, and they dress me. And I don't know about you, Eric, but I'm colorblind. So I don't even know what to match.
But you look so good, Mark.
Because they tell me at the St. Louis Suit Company what to match and what to wear. And I do it, and it works out great. And I always tell everybody, this is a really important one, Eric. I buy these ties. These are silk ties, and they are nice, really nice. And I buy them for $5. And I always say, look, you could buy one of these ties from that guy named Donald Trump. He'll sell you a tie for $50. The only problem is it's probably not real silk. And by the end, it may choke you. But that's another story. I like to get that story out there. So that's the St. Louis Suit Company. And they are in Clayton. and they are really good. They know what they're doing. So now,
Just FYI, those suits and that tie and the shirts, that's all, matched up like Garanimals. Remember the Garanimals? You just match the little tags.
yeah, that's exactly, because otherwise, I mean, if you ask me, brown and green, I can't tell you the difference. But anyway, so St. Louis Suit Company, they're great. And then also you can get fabulous jewelry if you go to Hampton. That's Jewels on Hampton. And they, of course, buy and sell coins and jewelry. They also create their own pieces of jewelry that you buy from them. They're very creative, and they'll do all kinds of things for you. They'll fix, if you have a watch. I have a 44-year-old Seiko, and you can take it into Jewels on Hampton. They'll fix that kind of thing. Yeah, they're great. Al is the owner. His son is AJ. They're always there. They're always great. Jewels on Hampton. They are a terrific sponsor for our show. Steph, got a question for Eric.
Of course. I'm going back to the guns.
Yes.
I personally want to talk about mandating them. I want to go back to mandating the guns and the fact that our young people are getting their hands on them often. The United States, we produce guns in a mass production, then we send them to other countries, and then somehow they end up crossing back over to our border into the hands of our young adults. What are your thoughts on mandating again?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm so glad you pointed out, Stephanie, is that like a lot of the illegal guns that come in are exactly like you said. They may have been manufactured in the United States, they're sent overseas, but they actually come through the border, right? They actually come, especially from Mexico. That's where you get a lot of the illegal trade in guns can actually come through. And so if you are going to crack down on illegal weapons, that you're exactly right. That's one of the places where you have to do it. If you're going to crack down on that kind of illegal trade that is getting guns in the hands of people who are convicted felons or minors who aren't supposed to have them, that's one of the key things that you do need to do.
Yeah, let me switch to politics here again for a minute, Eric. I've been friends with Freeman Bosley Jr. since 1990. And so that's 34 years. And Freeman started off, he was very young, and he became the first black mayor in the city of St. Louis. And he was a very young mayor. And, when he lost after the first term, and then he tried to run again, and he lost, that race. I said to him, what are you thinking about? Freeman, can't you go out here and fight? You're great. You can do it. And he said, Mark, I was one of the youngest mayors, and there's no reason that I can't end up someday being one of the oldest mayors. Now, when I tell him that story these days, like on his show, he always says, Kaysen, stop telling me that story. I never said it, but he did. He did. But and let me add to that. I'm sure Jerry Brown, who was a young governor,
right,
and then he was an old governor,
right.
And okay, so what are you thinking about for the future? And I'm wondering, you don't have to tell me this one so much. I would think you're a lucky person. You're fortunate not to be in this mess right now. I think that after this period has gone away, and I think it's going to end after this election, I really think good people are going to have a chance to step up again, and people will be interested. And that's all, me trying to convince you that you could be great. And I hope you're playing. I know you're great, but you could be a great political person. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about doing that someday.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really, really appreciate that, man. And there have been so many people like in Missouri and around the country who remain, and I really appreciate who remain supportive. And look, I've spent my entire life in service. So, as you mentioned, when I was young, doing that stuff with Bruce Carl in high school, and then whether it was Mother Teresa's Home for the Destitute and Dying, or the work that I did in Rwanda, enjoyed doing the humanitarian work, enjoyed being a Navy SEAL, enjoyed working with veterans, enjoyed serving as governor. So I'm definitely going to continue to serve. And I'm certainly, I will keep my heart and my mind and my spirit open to all of the different ways that can happen. And I do think that if the country is going to revive, and I think we're in a very, very tough spot right now, I think if the country is going to revive, you're going to have leaders who are working at a cultural level, which is what you and Stephanie are doing, having good conversations, having good people out there, helping to, educate people, to deepen thought. You're going to have people at a cultural level, and you will have to have some people at a political level. Right now, it's true, certainly of the government of the United States. And unfortunately, we saw it too often in the state of Missouri. You just see a government that is not able to handle basic responsibilities, not able to bring people together on a lot of basic questions. And that's one of the reasons why things are so hard. But for me, absolutely, my heart and my spirit and my mind remain open to the best way that I can be of service.
Yeah. And I also want to mention that, and we've talked about this, and I know your heart is here for sure. We just need to make it happen, because the kids at my school,
yes,
at Cardinal Ritter, are so anxious to sit down with you.
Beautiful.
As they have with so many different people. And I've talked about you, which I always do everywhere, because I know what kind of a unique person you are. I know your family, and I know how unique and great they are. So, this is not like some people who, they look at them out there and they say, well, this guy's been horrible for 40 years. And what do you expect? No, this is the opposite. You've been great for all these years, and you can be expected to continue doing that. Here's a tough one, though, I want to ask you.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it's not about Donald Trump. Which
okay, great.
Yeah. Because I'm going to leave him. Yeah, I'm going to leave him alone. Everybody knows that I expect that he will be president. I'm sorry, of the Prisoners Association. But let me say this, Eric.
Yeah.
Here's one guy that I really feel bad about, and that's George Soros. And let me say it this way. And I know everybody wants to bang on George Soros, and I'm sure George Soros doesn't even care. But the thing about it is, the man is a 90-year-old Jewish commodity trader. I mean, that's what he is. He's a commodity trader. And his partner is a very, very conservative commodity trader as well. And his name is James Rogers. And do you know James Rogers? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay. No. Yeah. So the two of them, it's almost like Mark and Jamie. I mean, really, it really is. This guy is so conservative. It's a joke. And the thing is that George Soros, at 90 years old, with his mind into commodities, first of all, he's not a communist. He's a commodity trader. And secondly, I can guarantee you, and I don't know him, but I know him, he is not sitting around thinking about how to cause evil, horrible things to happen in the world. But boy, I'll tell you, everybody that thinks that they can benefit, they're out there with a George Soros line. How do you feel about some guy like that? I mean,
well, one of the great things, Mark, about us having such a long relationship and such great love and respect for each other is that we can have different opinions on folks.
Sure.
And I think that George Soros has done a lot of damage, and I'll tell you exactly why.
Okay.
I think that, and just very specifically, one of the things that Soros did was that he found one of the chinks in the armor in the American system. And one of those chinks in the armor was that he figured out that he could fund radical circuit attorneys, radical folks like Kim Gardner, who would get into office and would, by their actions, have had, and he did this in many cases, had the capability to really tear a city down. And I think, look, what he did, keep in mind, he funded personally, all right, Kim Gardner's campaign was funded, I believe it was 68, might have been 73%. So forgive me if I'm off on the exact math, but 68 or 73% of her money came from one PAC. That PAC had one funder. That funder was George Soros. So Soros put Kim Gardner in office. And we also now know, Mark, you guys will remember that in 2017, when I was governor, when Antifa and a lot of the activists came and they said that they were going to burn St. Louis to the ground. And I said, we're going to protect everyone's constitutional rights, and we are not going to allow anyone to engage in burning, looting, arson, or assaulting police officers. And when we shut the protest down, we now know that it was right after that Kim Gardner started drawing up an indictment. They didn't know what they were going to charge me with, but they just decided that Eric Greitens was on their target list because we'd proven that you could protect everyone's constitutional rights. And with a combination of compassion and courage, you could make sure that people could be heard who wanted to protest, but there would be no looting, there would be no burning, there would be no arson. So I do think that George Soros has done a tremendous amount of damage. I do believe that what he has done has been nefarious. And I would also say, people talk about George Soros being Jewish. You go back and you look at what he actually did during the Holocaust and his participation in that, which has all been documented. I mean, there's 60 Minutes interviews where he talks about stealing from his fellow Jews. I think that he has been a very, very negative, bad, and I would say terrible. I'd actually even use the word, and I use this word very rarely, Mark, and I use it judiciously, but I'd say he's been an evil influence in many of the things that he has funded and has done.
Yeah. And again, like you say, I mean, disagreeing on some things is
that's part of the deal. Yeah.
I mean, you and I agree on a lot of things. Jamie and I don't agree on anything. And I love Jamie, so, so that's no problem at all. But I doubt that I'll ever get the opportunity, but I'd sure love someday. He's probably, he's too old. I'll probably never get to him. You and I will never be in the same room with him. But, I suspect that he isn't even close to what a lot of people think. Now, on the other hand, I do agree that the people you're talking about put a target on your back, and they were looking for you before you even did anything, and you never did any of the things that they said you did.
Right.
So it's a shame. I think that those kind of people can be beat by the truth, by honesty, by showing who you are. And unfortunately, I think some of the people on the other side were able to help the Kim Gardners and the Democrats. And so you got
Mark, let me make this super clear. Let's remind everybody. It wasn't just Kim Gardner. It was all of these coward Republicans.
Yes.
It was all of the lobbyist class. It was the whole thing. And Mark, one of the reasons why they didn't like me was because I stood up for people. I killed a politician's pay raise. We killed it for the Democrats and the Republicans. Why? Because they hadn't done their job. They hadn't fully funded things like education. So we said, you're not giving yourself a pay raise. This is the first thing
right
here. They didn't like it that I killed all gifts from lobbyists. The first thing I did when I became governor, these clowns, what they used to do, Mark, is the lobbyists would pay for trips for legislators to go to the Caribbean. And then, that's not influencing how I vote. Oh, come on. Yes, it did. And so and I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark. Look, there's a tremendous amount, I think, of some lunacy on the left, but you also have a lot of cowardice and a lot of corruption in the Republican Party as well. And that's one of the reasons why we're in the situation that we're in.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Steph. Steph, you
No, I'm
gotta.
just saying, I'm so glad he said that. I totally agree. I was always taught, every dog has a day, and sometimes dog has two. So go around, come around. So
That's right.
Yeah.
we already seeing it. So let it be done.
So when you look at the world, well, here, let's go directly to Ukraine.
Okay.
What do you think?
Oof. Well, I mean, I think I'd ask you to to think through which aspect of the problem. I think one of the things that we've really failed to do as a country is to really look at the roots of the problem in the Ukraine. Okay. Keep in mind, we had made very, very clear to the Russians. The promise was that we were not going to be extending NATO. We weren't going to be pushing farther and farther into the Ukraine. And I think that so that happened. And then you look at all of the corruption, right? People talk about what's happened with Hunter Biden and Burisma. Okay. I don't think there's anybody who's listening to your show who thinks that Hunter Biden deserved, what was it, $30,000 a month to be on the board at Burisma. I mean, come on, it's just corruption. And so, look, I served in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And in Iraq, we had that whole story about weapons of mass destruction. Okay. We need to actually look at the roots of a lot of the conflict. And one of the things that it always said was that you also have to look at what's in America's core national interests. And I don't think anybody's been able to define that to my satisfaction in terms of what we're doing in the Ukraine.
Do you think when you look at Putin, do you think there's any way that it would make sense to make the argument that Putin looks like Adolf Hitler in 1938 and 39 trying to run through Europe?
No, I don't think that analogy is right. I think one of the things we have to be really thoughtful about as students of history is thinking about which analogies we use. Keep in mind, one of the reasons why we got into Vietnam was because everyone was using the Munich analogy, right? Everyone said God, if we don't stop them here, if we don't stop, communism here, then it's going to take over all of Asia. That's why we have to.
And that turned out to be so dumb.
And so it wasn't accurate. It wasn't accurate to what was actually happening there at the time. And I believe that if you look at the entire history of Russia's articulation of what they think about as their national interests, I don't think for a second that, Putin has his eyes set on Paris. Okay. It's just not, we haven't, at least I don't see any evidence of that.
Yeah. But maybe Poland.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that when you look at the policy that Russia has been following and pursuing for a very long time now, and what Putin's been doing, I don't see that.
Okay. I mean, they're basically a gas station with an army. And
Mark, actually, one thing I want
Sure.
to speak to this. John McCain was the first guy who said that. He said,
Yeah.
said that Russia is basically a gas station, and I don't think that's right. And here's one of the reasons.
Okay.
Is that one of the things that people don't recognize? The reason why the Russians have been able to keep up against the entire NATO coalition in terms of armaments, for example, is because their economy still builds things. They still build things in Russia. We don't build things in the United States of America anymore. Second, we have many more students who are going to college, going to university, right? But they're getting degrees, unfortunately, in things like recreation management. And I have nothing against, the study of sociology or anthropology.
Right.
They're getting degrees in that. If you're in Russia, you're going to school, you're getting a degree in engineering, right? And a lot of times, one of the great conceits in America is to underestimate the strength of economies that don't look like ours. And yes, there's a tremendous amount of oil wealth in Russia, but they also do a number of other things which have helped, and which frankly we'd be better off doing in the United States. We'd be much better off if we had more engineers who we were graduating here in the United States. But you look at what Russia does in terms of graduating engineers, you look at what China does in terms of graduating engineers. We've got far too many very young, capable people here who would be better off. We'd be better off as a country with more degrees in mathematics, the hard sciences, engineering, et cetera. So anyway, I just want to say, I think that sometimes we have not really appreciated the strength of other economies in general and of the Russian economy in particular.
Yeah. Well, of course, they've got a $1 trillion GDP, which is smaller than Texas, and they got problems. I understand we're in their way. We're trying to, we've got sanctions on them. We're making it difficult, but they are basically, I mean, they're a giant country with a very small output.
Yeah, but even there, one of the things that Robert Kennedy famously said, this was Robert Kennedy Sr.
Yeah,
right?
The real one, right.
Yeah. and one of the things that he famously said was about measuring GDP, okay? In America, every single person who gets sick eating food and ends up eating poisonous food, right, with a bad American diet, and ends up being in our hospital system, they're all profitable. That all adds to our GDP. Every time an ambulance goes out to pick somebody up, it's a profit. It adds to the GDP. So the things that are measured in terms of their gross domestic product are not necessarily the things that you want to have in a country. The GDP is not necessarily a measure of the true strength of an economy. It can be a measure of a lot of activity, but a lot of that activity itself can actually be negative. We have supposedly we're the wealthiest country in the history of planet Earth. We are also the country in the history of planet Earth that has more people with more chronic diseases, more sickness, and more illness than any place in the history of the world. And all of that illness, all of that sickness, all of the prescription medications, all of the hospital activity, all of that counts towards our GDP. But having that count to our GDP doesn't really make us a stronger country. So again, I respect the point that you're making, trying to investigate the economies. I would just say that when it comes to like analyzing the strength of the Russian economy and using figures around GDP, they can often be a little bit misleading because they don't give us a true picture of the real strength of the economy. Like we're not stronger because we have a lot of people who have type 2 diabetes. We're not stronger because we have so many kids who are on prescription medications more than anywhere else in the world. But all of those things show up in our GDP.
Yeah. And what you said about healthcare is, I mean, this is a gigantic area of difficulty that we face. One of the things that I bring up all the time is that Black women in this country, and it could be wealthy, it could be poor, they are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. And that's a pretty sad situation for our country. And we have much more that is very difficult.
Well, let's speak to that. One of the things, again, you talk about Russia, okay? The infant mortality rate under Putin has actually plummeted and is in fact lower than it is in the United States of America. Okay. So one of the things that happens in America is that we don't have a healthcare system. I think people should stop calling it a healthcare system. Okay. We have a disease profit system. In America, who gets paid when you're healthy? Who gets rich when you're healthy? In a healthcare system, people would get rich when you are healthy. Mm-hmm. But in America, people don't make money unless you go to the doctor. They don't make a lot of money unless you go to the doctor and you're on prescription medication. They don't make a ton of money unless you go to the doctor, you're on prescription medication, then you end up with a chronic condition. All of these things are designed to make people sick. They are designed to make people ill. It is part of the design of the system. It is a disease profit system where people profit from making people diseased, which is why we have the most diseased, sick population in the history of planet Earth. And that is one of the reasons why we have to reform the system. And you can hear, Mark, in the way I'm talking about this, this is why people hated Eric Greitens as governor. Right? because that whole system, the entire system, okay, it works for all the lobbyists, it works for all the politicians. They're huge donors to politics. But when you have a guy like me who stands up and says, but is this actually making us healthy? And says, is this actually helping people? Then they don't want to answer that question.
Well, Eric, I thank you so much, and we're out of time. And, you know, we could always talk for 50 hours, but this was great.
Yes,
really
yes.
love it. Thank you very much.
Mark,
and
you're the best, Stephanie. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you guys.
And again, you know,
Anytime.
let's
Love to see you back.
Let's talk with these kids at Cardinal Ritter. We're really looking forward to that.
Yes, sir.
And hey, be healthy, be good, and we'll see you soon.
God bless you guys. See you soon.
Okay. So, Steph, end of an interesting day. Eric's a different person, that's for sure. He's
That's for sure.
He's not what everybody says, but no one's perfect either. And whatever his problems may be, I suspect, unlike Joe from last night, who believes that Eric is not coming back, I think he is.
I think he is too.
Okay.
I got that feeling that he might be coming back.
Well, we'll be back tomorrow at
Same
4
time.
o'clock. And this is Showdown. Good night.
Good night.